Hi again. This is week 9 of AI, Robots, and Ethics. And as you can tell from the course syllabus, if you look at the calendar, this is the final week of our online readings and study guide questions. After this week, we'll have a short break for the Christmas holiday. And then right after the first of the year, I will be visiting with you in Warsaw, and we'll have 2 weeks to sit down and talk about this material and work in a much more collaborative and interactive form and actually talk face-to-face as opposed to having to use technology, which I think would be very nice. So for this final week of AI, Robots, and Ethics, we are going to read the third chapter of my book, Thinking Otherwise, which is, of the machine question, and the third chapter is called Thinking Otherwise, And this chapter is designed not so much to draw everything to conclusion, but to give us a kind of closure on the kinds of questions that we've been asking and the kinds of investigations we've been pursuing. So if you remember, we started by parsing the question of machine moral responsibility and rights into the question of machine agency on the one hand and machine patiency on the other hand. We had a number of readings looking at the machine as a moral agent, a number of readings looking at the machine as a moral patient. And this week, we want to not so much resolve the agent-patient question, but ask, are there any other ways of thinking about this moral issue? Are there any other ways of thinking the moral relationship beyond the agent-patient dialectic? In other words, we want to think outside the box, if we can put it that way. It's a very colloquial way of saying it, but in a way, the moral agent, moral patient dichotomy has really organized a lot of moral thinking and, on the one hand, enabled us to do a great deal of work. On the other hand, restricting us from asking other questions, asking about others in other kinds of ways, if you want to put it that way. So the title of this third chapter is Thinking Otherwise, and I want us to hear Thinking Otherwise in kind of a twofold sense. On the one hand, thinking otherwise means another way of thinking. In other words, is there a different way of thinking about difference, about the other, about our moral responsibilities to the other, and about the rights of the other that don't fall into the category of moral agent on the one hand or moral patient on the other hand? So that's the first sense of thinking otherwise. The second sense of thinking otherwise is we want to open up moral consideration to others. Not just other human beings, not just other animals, not even just the environment. We want to be able to open up moral consideration to all those other kinds of others that have traditionally been marginalized in the history of moral thinking. So that's the second sense of thinking otherwise, a kind of thinking that can respond to and take responsibility for others and other kinds of otherness, if you want to put it in sort of a weird fashion, but that's probably a good way of formulating it. So you're going to be looking this week at ways of decentering ethics. A lot of moral thinking has organized itself around sort of central configurations of subjectivity like anthropocentrism, animocentrism, biocentrism, and even ontocentrism with Floridi's information ethics. And this week we want to ask about whether there can be an eccentric kind of moral thinking or a multifaceted center to moral consideration. And so we'll look at some decentered theories. We'll look at social constructivism as a way of formulating ethics not as an ontological decision-making process, but rather as something that is much more phenomenological and that occurs in social relationships where we construct the social dynamic in our response to and interactions with other kinds of entities. And then we'll look at some other alternatives derived from really innovative thinkers like Emmanuel Levinas, who has developed an ethics of otherness that, on the one hand, opens up moral philosophy to all kinds of new considerations, but on the other hand, still is itself limited in the way that it's able to accommodate all kinds of pluralities of difference and otherness. There's a way in which his philosophical thinking is still rather anthropocentric. And so we're going to follow some criticisms of Levinas through Derrida, through Jeff Nealon, and some other people who really push Levinas to be a little more innovative, to be a little more, let's say, inclusive of alterity or otherness and other kinds of otherness. So that's what we're going to be reading this week. As usual, I've given you some questions to guide your reading. The questions ask for you to not only grapple with the content in this third chapter, this Thinking Otherwise chapter, but also to sort of reflect on the course in total. In other words, one of the questions I'm going to ask you is, do you, from your own reading and your own thinking and your own writing on this subject, feel it is possible or even necessary to factor machines into our consideration of moral agency? Do you think it is possible or even desirable to consider machines as having rights as a moral patient? If you do, why? If you do not, why not? This way, we can hopefully take an entire 9 weeks worth of reading and interrogating and investigating and sort of give it a little personal shape. In other words, sort of have our own opinion about where machines stand with regards to the question of ethics and morality. In other words, what I want you to do with one of the questions this week is really answer or try to answer the machine question for yourself. Do machines have a place in moral consideration? If they do, why do they? If they don't, why don't they? And in constructing your response to this question, try to draw on things we've been doing for the last 9 weeks, because there's a lot of material we had in play, and obviously some of it worked well for you, some of it you really connected with, some of it maybe not. And I want us to be able to begin to leverage this stuff and make it make sense for us, and make it speak to our own moral thinking and our own way of thinking through this problem of machine moral standing. So that's all I have for this week. Have a good week, and I will see you in about 3 weeks' time. Thanks. Bye.